Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first session in American English Live Series 20. We're so excited that each of you joined us today. My name is Dr. Darlene Wiggins Dockery, and it is my pleasure to join the American English Live webinar team as the host. I am a global program officer with the U.S. Department of State's Office of English Language Programs. In this role, I serve as the social media manager and lead strategist for the Office of English Language Programs online engagement platforms. These include the American English at State and the American English for Educators Facebook pages, the American English YouTube channel, and the American English at state.gov website. For over 30 years, I have worked with learners of every age, from preschool to K 12 to higher education, including pre service and in service teachers. And I'm excited to join you for the American English Live webinar series. Today, I'll be joined by my colleague behind the scenes, Elena, who will be the moderator, helping answer your questions and responding to your comments during the session. Let's begin today with the audience comments from our most recent webinar, the content-based instruction approach to English language teaching, with Fatiha Makhloufi. So we heard from Emma from Vietnam, who said, through the session, I learned a lot more about CBI, especially using it to educate students about global issues. I love the strategies used to present CBI, such as podcasts, music, experiments, and my favorite, field trips. Thank you all for your work and time to create this session. We also heard from Carlos from Honduras. And Carlos said, CBI increases the learning skills of my students in relation to their social reality. They learn to solve problems in the community, and I developed some scaffolding methods. So Carlos left with something that he could put into action right away. We also heard from Zhao from China, who said, what a wonderful webinar it was. Students can express their views free of anxiety. That is important for my students who struggle with speaking. Thank you. I will try this method in my class. And that's what we want. We want you to take away something you can try right away in your classes. We love for our teacher participants to actively engage in professional development. So please continue to share your thoughts about our webinars by offering feedback through the end of session quiz form or by emailing to American English Webinars at fhi360.org. We may feature one of your comments during the next session. Throughout Series 20, we will explore a variety of strategies for developing listening skills in the English language classroom. We hope you will be able to use the practical ideas that we'll share. In addition to today's topic, we have more great topics coming up. Is there one of our upcoming sessions that you're particularly excited about? Let us know in the chat. So here is what you can expect in today's session. The session will be about 60 minutes long. The presenter will share the material, and I, your host, will ask questions and make comments too. But we really hope that we will hear from you, the audience, so that we can address your ideas and experiences. Please share your thoughts in the comment or the chat boxes. When the session comes to a close, you will have the opportunity to receive a digital badge for your participation. At the end of the webinar, we'll share a link to the documents. Click on that link and complete a short quiz about today's session. You must answer 2 out of the 3 multiple choice questions correctly on your first try. And if you successfully pass the quiz on your first attempt, you can expect to get a badge via email within about a week. And before we begin, we would like for you to know about one of our current massive open online courses, English for Media Literacy as a 21st Century Skill. In this MOOC, students will think critically about and ethically engage with social media and 21st century information. Course participants will examine the relationship between media and society, discuss misinformation and disinformation, and learn about the technology behind social media. The course is open now and enrollment closes June 17th. Use the link being shared by the moderator to learn more and to enroll today. Now for today's webinar, Teaching Listening, helping students be all ears for English learning. Being all ears is an English idiom that means to listen carefully and attentively. Unfortunately, research indicates that amid pressures to teach other language skills, such as speaking, reading, and writing, listening instruction is often overlooked. Moreover, modern listening instruction requires more than developing effective listeners in conversation and lecture settings. Today's students must learn to be multimodal listeners, that is, able to make sense of a variety of online and technology based audio resources. Today, we'll explore listening pedagogy with a goal of more than just bolstering students' listening abilities. We'll think about how to help learners apply their listening skills in support of becoming better speakers, readers, and writers. In this webinar, we'll examine several listening instructional strategies. So get ready to help students become all ears for multimodal English content. And we are pleased to introduce our presenter, Dr. April Salerno. April is an associate professor of English as a second language teacher education at the University of Virginia, where she also serves as the ESL online program director and the curriculum and instruction program coordinator. April teaches ESL teaching methods and assessment. She also coordinates courses in second language acquisition, applied linguistics, and cross-cultural education. Her research interests relate to preparing and supporting pre-service and in-service teachers to work with multilingual learners. April holds a PhD in curriculum and instruction from the University of Virginia, a master's degree in teaching from Western New Mexico University, and a bachelor's degree in journalism and English from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. April speaks English and Romanian and served as a Fulbright scholar in Moldova. Welcome, April.
Thank you so much, Darlene. I'm so happy to be here today and to be able to talk about this important topic of how to work with our students and to specifically teach them listening skills. I wanted to start off because I like idioms, and I think that they can just be a fun way for us to enter content. So I thought that given that our title has an idiom in it, that we would just explore a few other ear and hearing related idioms. And as I started thinking about it, I realized there are a lot of them in English. So one is being all ears that we have in the title, being eager to listen. Also, we have lend an ear, which means to pay attention to someone. In one ear and out the other means that I immediately forgot something after hearing it, or I didn't pay attention to it at all. It just immediately escaped my mind. Music to my ears means that you are saying exactly the thing I like to hear or what I want to hear. And play it by ear means that I am inventing something as I go along. I haven't practiced it, but I'm making it up as I go. So it's your turn now, and I'm interested to hear if our participants know of some other ear or hearing related idioms. And if so, could you share those in the chat? And it's fine. They can be idioms from English, but they can also be idioms from another language that you use and know. If you could just provide a translation for us and what the idiom means.
Oh, as you said that, other ear idioms, I thought of putting your ear to the wall, and that being an idiom about listening in on a conversation that you probably shouldn't have been privy to. So let's see what some of the responses we are getting from our participants. Oh, Anita says ears are burning is one. Tayar says, go ahead, April.
Yes, ears are burning. People are talking about me, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Tayar says, I'm in my ears. I'm not quite certain what that one would mean. What about you, April?
I was thinking of another one when you said ear to the wall. I was also thinking of when in my journalism background, which you mentioned, we talked about having our ear to the ground, which
Oh, yes.
it meant that you knew what was going on, maybe even before it happened, or you would know about the news story before it broke. You would know what was going on, what was happening.
Oh, yes, yes. I like that one as well. Pull your ear. That's one from Ismail Yilzada. And let's see, one more, and then we'll move on. Well, this is a comment. Diego said, idioms are super fun to learn and they add more life to the conversations.
Yes, it's a great comment. I agree. So just to give you an overview of the things that we're going to do in this session, today we will learn common myths about teaching listening. We will learn some how to teach listening, like how do we go about teaching listening. And we will learn at the end 4 new strategies and activities for teaching listening. So we're going to start first with the section about common myths about teaching listening. So what is a myth? And the title here has myth versus fact, that there's a contrast between the two. So a myth is something people often believe, but it's not true. And you might have heard about myths in relation to a topic like Greek mythology, where a myth can become like a folk story or a story that is popularly told and people understand. In the sense that we're using it today, a myth is something that people often believe, but is not true. And Darlene, if you will, I would like for us to play a little bit of a game.
Okay.
So what I'm going to show on the screen is two statements. And then you and also our participants, as you see them, can think, okay, which one is the myth and which one is not? And so you're trying to identify the myth. And then you can, the participants can put that in the chat if they'd like to, or they can note it for themselves as well. Okay, so the first one, which one is a myth? Students learn listening naturally without instruction, or students should be taught how to listen?
Okay, so I will say I used to think as a teacher of language that students learn listening naturally without instruction, and I was basing that on the fact that when a young child comes and they are trying to learn a new language, they often are the first ones to learn it in their family because they are immersed in school all day hearing the language. And so I thought before I became a teacher that would have been the truth, and that students should be taught how to listen would have been the myth. But then I thought about, as a musician, we have often taught people how to listen for a note. So I don't know, intuitively I feel as a musician I should have known which one was the myth, but as a teacher somehow I didn't make that connection. So which one?
Thank you, Darlene. I love that connection to music and learning to listen in music, because it's right that there are certain places and ways that we're refining our listening and teaching ourselves to listen for specific things. Okay, so yes, you're right here, that the myth here is that students learn listening naturally without instruction. And in reality, we can teach them a lot about listening. Now, it is true that humans naturally acquire language. And I will say that that is an amazing thing of being a human, that all healthy humans learn language. And so to a certain degree, you're right, that people learn naturally how to hear and how to listen. But we can also teach specific skills within that listening and help them develop those listening skills, especially when we're talking about working in a second or additional language. Okay, here's the next one. Which one is a myth? Listening is an active skill, or listening is a passive skill?
I base this on, again, my own experience prior to becoming a teacher. And I would have thought even then that listening is an active skill, because if you are listening well, you are tired often at the end because you've done a lot of work to stay focused and to figure out what to pay attention to. So I would have said listening is an active skill and listen is a passive skill. Listening is a passive skill was the myth.
Thank you so much. All right, let's look. Yes, listening is an active skill. And Darlene, I really liked what you said about the exhaustion and how tired you can feel, especially after listening in a second language. It's true. I remember, I think there were some times when I was first immersed in my second language when I might have actually fallen asleep at dinner because I was that tired. And I think that people who are multilingual can relate to that feeling. Listening also is active. If we were to put, a brain monitor and check our brains, like when we're listening and making connections, we see different areas of the brain lighting up and making those connections to the background knowledge that we have. And so, yes, listening is an active skill. Okay, here's the other one. Which one is a myth? You know a student is listening when they are quiet and calm, or you have to assess or test whether a student is listening.
Well, again, this one I have to base on myself as a student. I knew how to behave in class because I knew what would happen if I went home and I was not behaving. That did not mean I was listening. So, a student is listening when they are quiet and calm is a myth, definitely.
Yes, I think that's a good point. So let's see the answer here. Yes. Um, I think that sometimes I talk to teachers about the difference in being engaged and being compliant. That a student
Mhm.
can appear to look like they're listening or paying attention, but just as you said, your brain can be thinking of totally other thoughts. Whereas that active engagement means you're listening and paying attention. And to know about that, you really have to get some feedback from the students. You have to assess to find out what's going on inside their brain, even if they look like they're listening. Also, students might be very active, and that might be how they listen. They might process things with movement and boisterous energy, and that can sometimes trick us and think that they're not listening when in fact they are. All right, so to read your results, if you got all of these questions right, you are ready to learn more about listening. And if you got many wrong, don't worry, these are common myths. And so a lot of people have misunderstandings about them. So thank you for playing our game today. And Darlene, I appreciate you providing such great answers.
It was fun.
Okay, so your turn. This is for the audience. The question is, have you encountered other myths about teaching listening? So this might be something that you previously believed yourself and you learned differently, or it might be that you've met other people who believe this about listening or teaching listening. But are there myths that you have encountered in your life? And if you would like to share those in the chat.
Okay, so have you encountered other myths about teaching listening? See what responses we get. Well, we heard from Liliana, who said we need to train our ears to listen and identify what we are listening to. Um, so that is not a myth, but that is a very, very true comment. And Vania says she totally agrees. Listening is a lot when learning a language. So you ought to learn what to focus on. Deanna says if you listen the same recordings many times you will improve listening. I think that is a myth that she was identifying. And Amiz said listening is not important is a myth. Um, Christina said listening skill is about understanding every word you hear. That's a myth.
That's right. You might be listening for the overall meaning and the overall content, but getting caught up on the meaning of one word might cause you to miss that overall meaning.
Mm-hmm. And Nora said that hearing is the same as listening is a myth.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
And Murad, and then I guess this will be our last one for
Okay.
now. One of the myths about active listening is that it implies agreeing with or accepting everything the speaker says.
Absolutely true. You can listen, you can be a good listener and disagree with what's being said. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so in this session so far, we have now learned common myths and talked about those about teaching listening, and you all had some great ones to share to add to our list. I loved hearing that. So next, we're going to learn about how to teach listening. So you've heard us talk about the phrase multimodal listening. You've heard us say this several times. So I wanted to just, explain a little bit about what does that mean. Listening is often not in isolation. And we're going to talk today about what it means to isolate listening and to integrate listening. When we talk specifically about multimodal listening, we can break that word down. So multi as a prefix or a root word, a piece of a word, often means many, and modal means ways. So when we talk about multimodal listening, we're talking about listening in different ways. So different ways can come through different things. It can come through different sources. For example, You can listen to an audiobook, or you can listen to music, or you can listen to a radio drama. And the different genres that you're listening to will have very different formats, different messages, different purposes. And so we might listen for a different purpose. Someone commented about the purposes with which we listen. Those can be different when we listen to different sources. Listening can also involve different senses. There's interesting research out there about how listening is not just related to hearing, but is also related to other senses. So, for example, we might experience listening in tactile ways that involve, our feeling or touch. You might listen to a favorite recipe or an article about food and actually feel a little hunger or have your taste sense activated by that. So listening can be multisensory, meaning that it can involve many senses. Listening can involve different language skills. So it can involve not only listening, but also speaking, reading, and writing. And things that we'll consider and that are important to consider when designing listening teaching activities include thinking about different cultural differences about listening, how students have different proficiency levels, and that might affect their listening, and also the various resources that you have available. So we'll try to talk about those things too. So in terms of listening differences across cultures, I find this work to be very interesting. And I'm very excited to see, you asked, is there a session that we're interested in that's coming up? And I was very interested that there's a session coming that's specifically devoted to intercultural listening, because I think that's a really important and fascinating topic. So I think that's very exciting. We'll talk just a little bit here today about that, and then I hope that people will be able to tune into that whole session. So people show that they're listening in different ways and have different norms around what is appropriate behavior while listening. For example, people often mention eye contact, and in some cultures, you should look directly at the speaker, and in some cultures, you should not look at the speaker, and that, is considered good listening to do one or the other. Different nonverbal responses that people offer can really vary across cultures. For example, in some cultures, if I nod like this, I'm saying yes, that's how I do from my American background. But in other cultures, nodding might be saying that I'm disagreeing. So that's important to know about. Whether or not or how it's appropriate to ask follow-up questions varies a lot culturally, and it might vary also depending who the speaker is in relation to you and what the event or purpose of the event is and how that's structured. So follow-up questions can vary a lot. Social distancing in terms of how I should stand in relation or situate myself physically. How far away should I be from the person who's speaking? Should I get really close in their face, like to really show I'm interested? Or is that seen as kind of intimidating? Should I back up a little bit and allow them some space? It varies a lot from culture to culture. And one I like to talk about because it affects even, within my culture, in my family, the family that I grew up in, we are, I guess you could say we're very active listeners in that often interrupting or starting to talk when someone else is talking in American culture is viewed as rude. In my family, we interrupt to show that we really care about what you're saying and that we're really excited about it. So we might finish your sentence to say, hey, I'm really tracking with what you're saying. Like, I agree with you. I'm with you. Versus if I do that, at a job meeting I go to, they might think, oh, she's interrupting me and not listening to what I have to say.
I was thinking code switching when you said that, when you talked about in your family, you could do it one way, but outside, depending on the context, how you engage may differ. I too come from a very call and response kind of culture where you indicate that you're paying attention by interjecting with the speaker. And so, yes, I could definitely relate to your family.
Thank you. So this is your turn. What does good listening what does good listening look like in your home culture, or if you're teaching in a different culture from where you grew up, in the culture where you're teaching? So what does that look like for you? What is a norm that's maybe, specific for you in that environment? And if you can share some of those in the chat, that would be great.
Okay, so we are already getting some responses in the chat. We have heard from Noman, who said that eye contact and nodding are valued where
Mhm.
he's from. And then we heard from Ismailazada, who said eye contact is important, especially your love. And then we heard from Diego, who said in France, interruptions are considered an active participation in the conversation and it is not rude. Muhammad said quiet and calm is how you indicate you're listening. And Orlando said being quiet when someone is speaking. So those are some of the responses we have gotten so far.
Yeah, it's great. And it's really important, I think, to think about how our students, work within these norms, but they might encounter different norms when using English or when interacting with different people, and helping them kind of be aware of them can help them to be better listeners. So now we're going to talk about isolating and integrating listening. So when we talk about isolating listening, isolating means that listening is then becoming the sole focus. So we're really going to isolate listening for a specific activity so that we can really focus in on listening. Versus when we integrate listening with other skills, it means we're connecting to another language skill, for example, speaking, reading, or writing. And I'll point out to you that on this slide, I underlined the word "and" because I think that there are times to do both. So sometimes it's very important that we focus on isolating listening, so we really pay attention to it. And then other times we want to connect listening to the other skills so that students use across skills. And also in real life, we often are listening and speaking or another skill at the same time. So when we isolate, by isolating listening, we can really focus on specific skills like comprehension or pronunciation, specific skills within listening. And an example of this might be that I might tell students, I want you to listen to this passage and then raise your hand when you hear any of the new vocabulary words. So in this case, they are really listening specifically for that new vocabulary. But then to integrate the skill, we can take an isolated activity and change it so that we are linking in other skills with the listening. So we're going to go through an example here of how to integrate using an activity of listening bingo. So for listening bingo, these are the steps that you would follow to do this activity. You would have students draw a blank bingo grid on their paper. So a grid similar to what you see there on the image. And then you would tell them to fill in vocabulary words from a list, from a text, and they fill them in any order they choose. So they're practicing writing here because they're writing the words as well. Then you're going to read a text that features those words to the students, and students mark their cards whenever they hear one. So while they're doing that, they're practicing the listening skill. Then whoever gets the first is the first to get 5 in a row is the winner. And after that, students can turn and talk to their partners and share with them the words that they found or the words that they didn't find. And in that way, speaking is also used. I also wanted to share here an adaptation idea if you work with beginning level students. Sometimes with beginning level students, it can take a while for them to write so many words. So you could give them a card that's already filled in with the grid, You could also give them the word bank that they see right in front of them so that they can, very easily practice the words, that they're copying. Or you could give them words on cards, like the little notes that are shown, and let them arrange those around on the board without having to copy them. That also makes it easier for them to play a second round because they can move them around between games. So this is going to be a your turn activity. So the question is, how can we take this isolated activity and turn it into an integrated activity? So these are your ideas, and there's more than one way to do this. The activity that's isolated is listen to this speech for the speaker's main idea. So I would tell the students that and have them listen to the speech. So what else could you ask them to do that might integrate another skill with that?
Oh, that sounds exciting. I can't wait to find out what some of our participants are going to do with this activity. How can we turn this isolate activity into an integrate activity? Let's see. I see some responses coming in. Irena says we can use visual aids. Riyadh says by mentioning names. Orlando says ask for their options. And Giovanna says write a summary about the topic. So integrating
Yes,
some, go ahead.
it's a great idea. By writing the summary, then they've also integrated with the skill of writing.
Indeed. And then Uma says listen and fill in the missing words. Mm-hmm. And Victoria says fill in the gaps in the sentences or fill in the chart.
Mm-hmm. Great ideas.
And Seema says that they can work in pairs and discuss their answers.
Excellent. Then speaking is involved, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sifa said, I would tell them to listen attentively and I would give them some tasks which have some gaps and they can fill the gaps. And at the end, they can say their ideas.
Excellent.
So those are several skills integrated in that last activity.
Absolutely. There's a lot. You can put almost all the skills in one activity. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you for those great ideas. I love it. So far today, we have learned common myths about teaching listening. We have learned some about how to teach listening. And now we're going to learn 4 new strategies and activities for teaching listening. And I can tell that you're going to like some of these just from the comments that you had, because some of them are going to resonate well. So I think this is going to be good. All right, so the first activity is called Spot the Difference. And it comes from Pauline Gibbons' book on scaffolding language, which scaffolding means like to offer temporary supports for language learning. And so we're going to do Spot the Difference. I'm going to give you the steps and then we're going to try it out. Okay, so the first step in Spot the Difference is the teacher gives the students a copy of a text. So any text. Then I'm going to read aloud a slightly different version, and then you're going to listen and circle the differences. So you won't really be able to circle on the screen, but you can note those down as we go. And so in that way, you're practicing both reading and listening at the same time. And then afterwards, when you do this in the classroom, you could have students share the differences that they found with a partner. And that way you also involve speaking. So that's a way to integrate it. Okay, so we're going to try this out. So you're going to follow along on the text on the screen. I'm going to read a slightly different text, and I want you to try to notice the differences. And then once you have the differences, you can share those in the chat. But you might want to listen to the whole text first, because if you start sharing one difference, you might miss the next difference. So that's my tip. My tip is listen to the whole thing first. Okay, So here we go. The house had many large rooms. One room was for the parents. It had large windows to let in the sun. The second room was for a baby who rarely smiled.
Those differences really can change the meaning of the whole text.
That's
Let's
right.
Okay, so we've already heard from some participants. We have Saliha, um, who has asked a question as we are waiting for some of the other responses to come in. And the question is, how do you handle the situation with support for a student with social anxiety?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. And so I guess that, a lot of it depends individually on how that student, the anxiety is affecting them. But I think that there are different ways in terms of modifying. One, I wouldn't want to put that student on the spot. So maybe I'm going to have them like work with a partner that they feel comfortable with to do this activity. So if we're talking about spot the difference, if it makes them really anxious, that they've got to find that difference, like maybe working with a partner helps. Maybe if they know that they're going to hear the text more than one time, so it's not high stakes. If you miss it the first time, there's a second opportunity. So I think it's like paying attention and talking with the student, what causes that anxiety, and looking for ways that can change the classroom environment to help them.
Thank you so much for that. We have some people who have spotted the difference. We have Anita, who pointed out that it was large rooms. Marco said large and rarely.
Yes.
Let's see. Nora said large, parents rarely were the differences. And Natalia says big rooms always smiled. Those were the differences there.
Well done.
Mhm.
Yes, you have spotted the differences in the text. And this slide will show you the three differences that were there embedded. So you can check your work. There are some ways that also you can adapt this idea for this activity for different purposes. So one way is to use technology. So you can do spot the difference using a song or a podcast with the lyrics or the transcript to that given to students with slightly wrong or changed text. I love to use publicly available podcast sources like public radio websites that have podcasts. And the thing I love about this is that it can expose students to different voices and accents and regional varieties. I think a beauty of English is that we use English all over the world in various global varieties, and getting to expose our students to those, differences in how people talk. Sometimes our students can get very used to the way we as their teacher talk, and then it can be confusing to them the first time they hear someone with a different accent or a different choice of words even. And so to expose them to that using different voices can be great. If you can't access online sources, you can still accomplish that same goal by inviting other people to come in and read to your class, or if you have the ability to record them, to record themselves and to play those texts for students. And there are different ways that you can take spot the difference activity and make it more difficult for advanced students or easier for beginning level students. So for example, you could make it really difficult if you wanted to take words that are very slightly different pronunciations from each other. So we talk about minimal pairs, which are words that maybe have just one phonetic sound different, like for instance, ship or sheep. And you could write the spelling for one, but say the other and see if students catch it. So for very advanced students, you could have them try to figure it out. Or you could also have students take and modify the texts themselves for their classmates. If you don't have much technology access, you can also use the text that students already have. If you follow a set curriculum, then you could take and just modify it yourself and let them look at the text that's already in the book. And it can be a more engaging way for them also to read the text if they know that they're listening for the changes that have been made. The next activity that we're going to talk about is a listening scavenger hunt. So a scavenger hunt means looking for a list of specific things and trying to be the first to find them. So in that definition, scavenger hunts are competitive. They can also be collaborative. So you can work together as a team to try to find something, all together and accomplish that goal. So there's two ways to set that up. So instructions might involve select an English film or a song, for example, and then give students a list of keywords, phrases, or idioms to listen for. Students identify the words, phrases, or idioms while they watch or listen. And so then they're involving listening and writing because you ask them to write those down. Students report back when they hear an item from the list. So in that way, they're also practicing speaking. There are lots of different ways to modify this. So for advanced students can listen to a song and identify figurative language or advanced grammar structures. So maybe you're teaching the conditional and you want them to listen for it. So you give them a part of a film where people are using conditional in that and see if they can pick that out and see where they used it. By figurative language, I mean language that's creative or not literal. It's often used in poetry or in texts that compare things, like using metaphors to compare two different things. And you can ask the advanced students to try to find those things and examples of them. Music has lots of figurative language in it. So I've had lots of success asking students to bring in a favorite song that they like that uses figurative language. If you don't have access to media, you can also ask students to do a scavenger hunt looking for words or phrases in books or in conversations that they could translate from another language. So these are ways to adapt it, based on what resources you have available. The next activity we're going to talk about is really a favorite of mine. I find this one is just really fun for working with listening. So this is called a dictogloss. So for the steps for the dictogloss are, I'm going to read a short text that you have not seen before usually. So it's usually a new one. And I'm going to first read it 2 or more times. And during this time, it's an isolated activity. I'm asking you just to listen to the text. Then on the 3rd time that I read it, I'm going to ask the students to try to write down as much as they can. So they can write while I'm talking. And then after I talk, I'm going to be quiet for a little bit and let them write down as much as they can remember of the text. So now we've integrated the listening with writing. Then in the 3rd step, we're also going to integrate speaking. So they turn with a partner and they share to them what they were able to write down, remembered from the original text. Their partner then would share what they wrote down, and together they try to write a new version. So one way that you can make this harder for advanced students is you can set a rule where they're not allowed to show their paper to their partner and they have to only talk about it, so that you can make them only do it, in a little bit harder of a listening way. And then The next step is that the pair joins another pair. So they come together in groups of 4 and they do the same thing. And then you keep actually doing rounds of that. So the group of 4 might join another group of 4 and you have 8 people together until you come together as the whole class. And at the whole class level, you want to see, does the whole class have a text version written that is close to what you originally said? And I find this one to be very fun because I can sometimes give students texts that they think are very challenging, but then by the end, they can often, all of them together, get most of the pieces of it. And so that is a feeling, I think, of accomplishment too, but it also has them practicing the new words and working with the words that I'm wanting them to learn. So there's a lot of benefits there. An adaptation idea is that you can use this with an English song that the students think they know very well. That can be fun as well because they might think they have the lyrics down and then at the end they realize they didn't have them all the way they thought they were. Lots of different fun ways to go about the dictogloss.
Hasn't that happened to you too, that you thought you knew the lyrics to a song and then you saw what they really were and you've been singing it wrong your whole life?
It absolutely has. Absolutely. The next activity that we have are cloze activities. And this is one where I think that many of our participants have some experience here because I loved how they were talking about filling in the blanks before. And cloze activities really are that. They mean that students fill in the blanks while listening to a text. And these are great because they are so flexible and you can do so many different variations with them with very little preparation time. And honest, we know as teachers that sometimes we have to do things in the moment that, we didn't have time for preparation. And so this is one that can be used that way. You can choose texts that vary in topic and genre. And you can change around where you put the blanks or how many blanks and how you do it. So an example here in the box are, I might read the text out loud. Cloze activities are fun. I like to fill in the blanks. And then the students are then filling in those blanks and writing them. For beginning level students, you might give them a bank of words to choose from to help them. For more advanced students, you might see if they can get the words from their own knowledge of the words they know. You can also give different versions with harder or easier blanks. I can imagine you can give an advanced students, I've done this, all blanks. So it's just a paper with a blank for each word and see if they can write the whole thing. For a low-tech option, you can have students create their own cloze activities for each other. So you can have them make it up and ask the student, that's something, a student partner. And that's something that you can do, especially if you're reviewing a unit, like at the end, like to have them go back and make up some cloze activities for each other to help review. So now it's your turn. What is your favorite strategy or activity that you use to teach listening? And if you can share those in the chat.
Okay, what is your favorite strategy or activity that you use to teach listening? Let's see if any responses have come. Okay, well, Lily said add some art too, maybe drama and theater.
Yes, nice.
Julia says great concepts. I use these in class all the time. Gap games, bingo, categories, TED Talks for global language varieties.
Great idea.
And Saliha says, how much time does such an activity take? So she has a question. The dictogloss, for example.
Yeah, so I think that one is one where it can take a little bit of time. It depends on how long of a text you pick and how complicated it is. So for a very short text, less time. And then again, it also depends on the skill level of the learners. but you do need to allow the time for the combining of the groups. So if you figure that you need a couple to a few minutes for each group to combine, then you want to figure out the math of that when you're planning.
Okay, I just wanted to share a few more of our activities that our participants have shared with us. Um, Tia does songs with gaps. Ria does outdoor activities, says they're fun. Nazi says, I actually like to turn listening into wall dictation quite a lot. And Adolfo says, watch video and then follow up with questions.
Great
So
idea.
those are. Mm-hmm.
So in this session, we have learned common myths about teaching listening. We have learned about how to teach listening, and we've learned 4 new strategies and activities for teaching listening. So as the final reflection, some of you mentioned this already in your last question, but if there's one new thing that you would like to try in your classroom based on today's presentation, now would be a good time you could put that in the chat.
We already had several ideas that had come in of things they plan to chat to do right away. Let's see. Well, Christina said that, yeah, bingo is great too. I've never played that before and I will try. So that's something that is going to be put to use right away. Jules said that listen and spot the mistakes is something they will do right away. And Tia says the listening scavenger hunt is something they will do right away. The bingo method's very popular. I'm seeing that come in a lot. Murad also is going to do that. And Simon said, I really love this webinar session. So thank you, Simon.
Thank you so much. I've really had a great time, and I appreciate your all the great ideas you're sharing.
So we want to say thank you to you, April, for sharing your great ideas and these exciting instructional strategies that can be used to support students in becoming stronger multimodal listeners. We'd also like to thank you, our audience, for your engagement and participation today. Please continue to share your ideas through social media or with your viewing groups after the session ends.